This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in the Inland Empire today. We are sitting in the middle of Jose Medina's district. We are in Riverside. He is a member of the California State Assembly. We thank you for joining us and we welcome you back to the United States because I know recently you took a trip to Mexico. You are the chair of the Select Committee on California-Mexico Binational Affairs. I'm sure a very important trip, very enlightening.
It was, Brad, and first of all, thank you very much for having me back on the program. We had a great trip with the Select Committee. It was a year after the governor's trip,
Right.
Of which I was also a member a year ago when the governor went and signed various memorandums of understanding with the government of Mexico.
And that trip was historic. Several agreements were entered into with the governor as well as Mexican leadership, focusing on climate, focusing on higher education. How has this past year been in terms of putting into action those MOUs?
So that was part of the reason for going. And we were able to meet with various government officials. We were at the Casa California, which is UC's presence in Mexico.
Where is it?
It is on the outskirts of Mexico City.
Okay, that's fine.
A great old building, and had good meetings, and met with education officials in higher education, and we were looking at figures. I also met with the American Embassy.
Sure.
And looking at how we're doing a year later. And we're seeing that we're doing somewhat better in the number of students that are coming from Mexico to California and also from California to Mexico.
And that's what I want to know about is the other way. Because in so many ways, it's my perception that Mexico is 200 miles away, but it might as well be 200,000 miles away for some of us. We just don't have a sense of our neighbor, our friend to the south.
You know, I think that we still have sometimes misconceptions about Mexico. If we have conceptions of Mexico as being, you know, quaint, quiet beach towns, that's not modern day Mexico today, where there are building airplanes, where there are number one trading partner. And definitely it's a place where more California college students should be going.
You went during a time where the rhetoric relating to Mexico in connection with some presidential candidates was very heated. And I'm wondering if you heard anything from Mexican leadership about the inflammatory rhetoric, I'll just use that term, in connection with U.S. Mexican relations.
We didn't hear it so much from government officials as we heard it from just, I want to say Mexicans on the street. And Mexicans on the street, taxi drivers were very well aware of what some of the rhetoric has been here in the United States as far as the presidential candidates here.
And in some ways, I think those conversations are more insightful. And so I'm wondering, what was their feeling about that rhetoric, which, as I said, some have called inflammatory?
Yeah, you know, I think in my travel to Mexico, as well as travel to Panama, where my family comes from, you know, there is a sense of alarm, in both of those countries. Anytime that in the United States we kind of ramp up our anti-immigrant rhetoric. There is a high sensitivity, and I think it reflected both in Mexico and in my recent travel to Panama as well.
But Panama, not a hot spot, I guess you could say, for that rhetoric.
Well, Panama does not send the number of immigrants that Mexico does, but it shares the sensitivity. And interesting enough, both Mexico and Panama canceled their Miss Universe participants. Both of those two countries did.
I remember that.
And so I say that both countries are very much surprising how much just regular common people are listening to what's being said here in the United States.
What I'm wondering though is, I know part of the committee's goal, its focus, is to build business relations as it relates to education between Mexico and California. Does this heated rhetoric work against your mission?
Well, I think one of the first things that we saw Chancellor White when he took over
the
the
CSU
chancellor,
who had
was-
been UCR chancellor.
Right, and one of the first things he did as chancellor of CSU is lift the ban on California State University students to travel and study in Mexico. And that came soon after he was in place as chancellor.
Why was the ban there?
The ban was there because there had been travel warnings by the State
safety.
Department, all right, concerns with safety. I agree with that action and think that, that more students, more American students should take advantage of Mexico, our
Right.
#1 training partner, for all sorts of higher education opportunities, including language, business.
Right. Let me ask you about safety, though, because that is an issue for both Americans and Mexicans. Again, I don't know if the headlines are hyperbolic. I don't know if the violence is as severe as some in the media would make us think, but there is a perception that Mexico has become, I guess you could say, the Wild West. Did you focus on that at all?
We did. We did speak about that. I think we spoke about that with the American embassy officials and government officials, and I think they would both agree that Mexico is safe for American students, that the violence that does exist, and there's no denying it, is sometimes very localized in certain areas of the country.
What about the question of the drug trade and drug trafficking? Was that discussed as well?
We had a very, I want to say, fruitful, interesting meeting with an American journalist. I'm forgetting his name. He's
okay.
with the Dallas Morning News.
Right.
He wrote an excellent book that I've been reading, Midnight in Mexico. And he writes about just that. He writes about the drug cartels, violence.
Right.
And so it's a concern, and then, I think it's a concern of the members of the legislature as well, of the select committee, but that is not all of Mexico.
So where does the committee go from here? There does seem to be momentum from the trip last year with the governor, this year's trip. How do you continue to build relationships, alliances, partnerships to the benefit of both California and Mexico?
Yeah, we want to make sure that the numbers continue to increase, the number of students from both directions. We want to monitor that. We're seeing that a lot of the students that are coming from Mexico to California are coming for short term. We want to make sure that at all levels, whether it be at the highest end, postdoctorate study.
Right, sure.
But also K-12, that continues. So we want to monitor that as well.
So meaning having exchange programs for?
Well, yeah, and I think we do have. We have
For K-12?
opportunities for teachers to go to Mexico, probably foreign language teachers.
Right.
And we're seeing some of that. And we want to make sure that continues.
So what's next? A trip next summer?
Well,
is this going to be annual?
we had a hearing this morning
Right.
in San Bernardino about small businesses.
Right.
I mentioned that on our trip we talked that California is not represented, has no trade office in Mexico City. 21 other states do.
That's shocking.
And so
That has to
I
change.
want to pursue that.
Okay, that's the goal of the Select Committee on California-Mexico Binational Affairs. He is the chairman of that Select Committee for the California State Legislature or Assembly?
Assembly.
Assembly. He is Jose Medina. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is Charter Local Edition.